Hey friends, welcome back to the Be a Better You podcast. I am your host, Allison K. Dagny, and today's episode is going to be a very emotional one for me to share. I have a story that I want to share with you that happened to me in my abusive relationship, which I have never shared before. And I want to talk about this because one of our listeners had reached out to me and told me that one of her beliefs, or one of the things that she was saying and carrying around for her, is, why can't I ever be good enough? And that is something that's very common, and it struck me. And I started to think about how this also was something that came up for me, and it's probably something that's coming up for you too. So first and foremost, I want to thank this listener for sending me in her belief so that I could address this today on the podcast. Now, this type of thought, the questioning, like, why can't I ever be good enough, can drive us into these endless cycles of rumination, leaving us feeling trapped because all we're trying to do is get the answers, right? We're repeating this question, why can't I ever be good enough? And it's causing us to search for answers that we may not have an answer to. Now, I'm going to explain to you a reframe a little bit later in the episode for this particular question, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to share this story, and I'm going to be really vulnerable about divulging the details of this story because in my marriage to my ex, I had tried really, really hard to be enough, and I felt like everything I did was never good enough. And that's when I really started to see how, thinking about this, thoughts like this can really keep us stuck in rumination and always questioning ourselves. So even back then, during my abusive relationship, I was questioning, why can't I ever be good enough? And it took some practice to change that and shift out of it. And I'm going to help you with that today. So I also wanted to remind you that I have an upcoming training on December 11th where you'll be diving deep into understanding and identifying rumination patterns. So if you're interested in joining us for that, you can get the link in the show notes. It's called Break Free from Rumination. There's going to be an option for a $10 discovery upgrade also. So if you want to do that, I am going to have a separate Zoom call directly afterwards where anybody who signs up for that will get a personalized deep dive into their subconscious to figure out the source of their rumination. Okay, so let's get into this episode and talk about what this is. So when you're feeling like that you're not good enough, first of all, and you're questioning yourself, like, why can't I ever be good enough? Your mind just keeps going back to everything that you wish that you'd done differently, or how things should have been, or how broken that you are, right? That there's something wrong with you. And this is rumination at its core, right? We're reliving the old memories, we're replaying old conversations, we're overthinking things in detail and questioning ourselves, and often questioning our worth. And this is because on some level, you're just trying to find out where you went wrong. And that's very normal and that's admirable, right? Because maybe you're thinking, if I had done something differently, things would have turned out differently. Or if I could just be different, maybe I would be loved, right? So here's the twist on this. Rumination is never about finding solutions. It's your mind's way of just repeating something that it thinks you should have done differently, right? Even when there's nothing you could have ever done to change it, right? Because we can't even know. Like, if you went back in time and you were doing all the things that you thought maybe you could have done differently, you can't even guarantee that that would make you feel like you were good enough. I mean, when I look back at the things that I did in my marriage, I was going above and beyond. I was doing the most outlandish things, and I'm going to share one of these stories with you here shortly, but I was doing a lot of stuff that most people would be like. I remember telling some of these stories to friends of mine at the time, and they just looked at me like I had three heads, and they just couldn't believe that I was willing to do the things that I was doing. And it was because I had this drive to erase this feeling of not feeling good enough. So this is, again, a very vulnerable story for me to tell, and I'm going to try not to get too emotional when I tell it because it still is very painful to me, but I'm going to share it with you because I think it needs to be said. Now, when I was married, my ex did a lot of things that he liked to do. And I often went along with what those things were to make him happy. So he was someone who would dive into different types of habits and hobbies a lot. And he might do that for a few months and then switch to something else. So he liked to try like making beer at home. He liked to do frisbee golf. And these weren't things that he did long term. These were things that he tried for a short period of time and then kind of got bored with it. So there was a lot of things like this. Hunting was one of those things. Now, I would always participate, whether I wanted to do it or not. I did it because I thought it would make him see me in a different light or feel like that I was good enough. So I was doing lots of things. We had a very large piece of property, and we had to take care of a lot of gardens. I had to take care of a lot of yard. I had to take care of our chickens, and it was a lot of work. It was a lot of physical work. I mean, on some days I could get 17,000 steps a day just by walking around my house and doing work. So, and that was probably one of the highest ones. But on average, I was moving a lot. And so the point of me telling you this is because I was involved in a lot of things because of him and trying to get him to see my worth and my value and feel good enough, right? So when you're believing things and you're having these questions like, why can't I ever be good enough? I get that. Now, here's the thing that happened one day. So we had a flock of chickens in a little coop in the backyard, a little red coop that I'd painted. And it was a fun hobby. I enjoyed taking care of them. But ultimately I was doing all the work. It was his idea, but oh yeah, this should be fun. And most of the time, the work fell on my shoulders. Well, being a stay-home mom for as long as I was, there were times that we had to protect our chickens from raccoons and possums and foxes and things like that. So, his job was to kind of secure the coop and the fencing and all of that, which he did. And then at times there would be break-ins basically from the wild animals that were in the woods around our home. And I remember one particular summer that one of our chickens had gotten out of the coop and was in the run. So if you're not familiar with this, there's like a little door in the back, and then they can go out into the exterior area that's fenced in from all sides, top, bottom, and it's even like dug into the ground so that like a raccoon can't dig through. Well, I don't know why this chicken went outside, but it did. And it's poor, I'll save you the gory details, but apparently when it went out, a raccoon had yanked its head through the chicken wire and the chicken was killed. So we knew that now they had a taste for the hens and they were going to be coming back, and they did. And came back again and got into the coop through one of the egg boxes. And this was really traumatizing, right? The kids are, little, they're knowing that these chickens, now this is part of living on a farm, things like that happen. But we had to do something about it. We had to protect our little chickens. And at this point we only had, 4 left. And they were being eaten basically by raccoons. So my husband at the time, who is now my ex-husband, he, researched or found out from friends or whomever to get these particular traps that you put out in the woods and around the coop even. And the traps are like a little metal tube that you stake into the ground, and you put a marshmallow or something that a raccoon would like to eat in the tube. And when the raccoon puts its hand in the tube, it gets trapped and then it can't get out because it'll just reach in with its little hand. Oh, this is a really tough story for me to tell. Okay. Sorry. Okay, let me keep going here. So the day that he put them out, or the night before he put them out, the next day he had gone to work, and he asked me to go check the traps. So I did, and there were 2 raccoons trapped in the traps. Now, raccoons are the cutest, most adorable little things. Their faces are sweet as can be. They remind you of a little cat or a dog, or, they're just sweet little looking animals. And when I got out into the woods and I saw this trapped raccoon, I was so heartbroken. And this is where the vulnerability of my story comes in, because this was many, many years ago. But I knew that if I did something about this trapped raccoon, that, well, at least I believed that maybe my husband would think I was good enough. Maybe he would love me. Maybe he would be impressed by me. And so I ran to the house, and the kids were at school. I ran to the house and I got my little pistol, which is a .22. It's a tiny, tiny bullet. And I ran back out I was running as fast as I could, and my heart was beating just through my chest. And I wasn't too far away from this raccoon. And I knew that I had to kill it, because you can't just release it out of the trap. It would attack you. It would bite you. It has to be killed. There's no other way with this kind of trap. You can't release them. They're literally on a 3-inch chain in this tube. And this is horrible. And I'm sorry if this is heartbreaking to you, and feel free to turn it off if you want to not hear the rest of the story. I wouldn't blame you. But what I had done at that point was, I wasn't too far away. I was about 10 feet away, and I aimed my gun and I shot the raccoon, and it didn't die. And I shot it again and again, and I emptied every single round out of that gun, and the raccoon didn't die. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do something. I've just literally sprayed bullets at this poor little animal. It's probably terrified. So I took off running as fast as I could. And I was probably a good, 3-minute at least run from my house. And I was running as fast as I could. And I got more bullets and brought them back. And this time I got a little bit closer, and I hate to even think about this story, but it has to be told. And I finally ended up killing that raccoon. And it was the first time I'd ever actually harmed an animal like that. And if you know me personally, you know that I love animals. And it's really painful just to even recall this story to you right now. But it was so hard to do that. But I knew at that point, it had to be done, because I had already hurt the animal so much and was probably scared it so much that I just wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. And I went back to the house, and I was in tears, way worse than I am right now. I haven't told this story in a very long time. And I ran back to the house, and I called my husband, and I said, I'm never doing that again. I killed the raccoon, and I was so distraught. I was like, there's another one, and I'm not doing it. You have to do it. I'm not going to do it. And the most hurtful thing that happened after that story wasn't that he wasn't compassionate, or because he kind of giggled about me being so upset about just killing a raccoon. But it was very painful for me to do that. But I did it because I wanted his approval, and I didn't get it. And at that point, I had already taken this little life, and I just felt even worse about myself, because trying to get someone else's approval and doing something that goes against your values or goes against what you want just to kind of prove yourself is such a lack of integrity. And I understand why I did it now. And if you have done things like this, I understand why you do it. Because we do things to try to feel good about ourselves and to feel good enough. Now, this is a very extreme example, and the story is to illustrate the lengths that abuse survivors will go to, the things that we will do just to get somebody to love us, just to get somebody to feel or to make us feel like that we're good enough. We're hoping to get that validation and acceptance from somebody, right? And at the expense of what? At the expense of your values, at the expense of a life, right? At the expense of, the shame that you feel from doing it. So thank you for listening to my story. And if you've gotten this far, I hope that that you can reflect on things that maybe you have done and not beat yourself up for those things, because I have, even though I'm still emotional about it, I have forgiven myself for what I did. And I know that I did what I did with what I had at that time and the desires that I had in order to feel the way that I was trying to feel in a very, very abusive situation. Now, I want to explain to you that if you have done something like this, or you felt the need to do something to try to prove your worth to someone else, I have to tell you, there's nothing wrong with you. This is normal. People do this all the time. There's just not a lot of people who want to talk about it. There's not a lot of people who actually want to admit it. But, if I'm going to help you, I have to be true and I have to be authentic and I have to tell you the truth. And that's what happened. Am I proud of that? Absolutely not. Would I ever do that again for anyone? Absolutely not. And I learned a big lesson that day. I was still looking for love. I was still looking for self-worth and acceptance and to try to feel like I was good enough. And I wasn't able to do that until after I got out of that emotionally abusive relationship. And when I did, that's when I worked on the feeling inside myself of feeling good enough so that I didn't have to do things that compromise my integrity just so other people would see me as valuable, just so other people would think I was impressive, or just so other people would think I was good enough. And so after leaving that emotionally abusive relationship, that's when I got into this deep work of learning how to love myself, to know that I am good enough exactly how I am. And the one thing that I realized was that hoping to get validation and acceptance from anywhere outside of me was actually never in my control at all. The only thing that I could control was how I feel about myself. Now, this belief or this thought loop of why can't I ever be good enough, right? It starts with this feeling of inadequacy based on your programming, based on what other people have told you, based on how other people treat you, of not being good enough. And it's a way of mentally rehearsing or replaying and punishing ourselves as if somehow going over and over it again is going to change the outcome. So if I back up to the time when I was in that relationship and I was doing all these things to try to gain approval, right? That was a form of rumination. How can I get him to love me more? How can I get him to see that I'm good enough? What can I do today? What would he find impressive or valuable, and what would make him love me more, right? So that is a form of rumination. But then afterwards, like after doing the things that you're doing or things that you've done, like something that I did, I was replaying that horrible scenario in my mind over and over again and punishing myself about it, right? As if somehow it was going to change the outcome, or somehow it was going to make me a better person. I'd already chosen that was never going to happen again. I was never going to do that again. So why was I replaying this thought over and over and over again? So a thought loop that says, why can't I ever be good enough, can lead to bad behaviors. It can lead to destructive behaviors. It can lead to us doing things that we would never, ever do. We need to know our worth inherently so that we don't get trapped into those kinds of things, right? Because if we're repeating these ruminating thoughts, it's natural that we would act in a way that is reflective of that thought. If I believe I'm not good enough, I'm going to do something to avoid feeling that way. So there can be negative consequences and costs to ruminating in such a way like this. Now, if you subconsciously believe something like, I'm not worthy unless I'm perfect, or I need approval to be valuable or to be worthy, then rumination can become a habit there, right? Your mind gets stuck replaying maybe painful scenarios, hopes of finding validation, hopes of getting closure, or whatever that might be. So just this initial belief that this person wrote into me, this listener who said, why can't I ever be good enough? There could be many other ways that that's said, not just in that one way. Like, I'm not worthy, or if I mess up, no one will love me, or other people's opinion of me matters, right? There's a lot of ways that this can come up. So it's really important to not only stop or choose that first thing, but figure out how else that you say it and what else is coming up. Because, I don't want, if you're listening to this and you just heard this vulnerable story that I shared, I don't want you, if you're feeling not good enough and you're feeling like you can't ever be good enough, that your behaviors turn into external validation seeking behaviors, right? This is why a lot of young women who don't feel good enough will do things that are unbecoming of them to get attention or to get someone to love them. And I was no different. I did something I am not proud of at all. But I can't change the past, and I forgive myself for that. And all I can do is learn from that mistake and go forward. But the big key here is that I learned to love myself. I learned my value. I know that I don't have to do things that compromise my values or my morals or integrity in any way anymore. But I had done that in the past because I didn't believe that at the time. I didn't believe that I was good enough and that I believed I needed that external validation. And so your behaviors are going to be reflective of what you believe. And this is really important to know, because if you're not familiar with what you believe, then chances are, or if you're not aware, then chances are there's going to be behaviors that you're not proud of. And then what happens is you get stuck in this loop of regret, and now you're ruminating over the past about something that you did that you didn't want to do, or something that you are not proud of. So this can be a very destructive cycle. Rumination isn't just about thinking about your ex or thinking about old conversation. It can be over a lot of things. It can be over anything. Okay, so I mentioned earlier I was going to give you a reframe for this where you can learn to shift out of why can't I ever be good enough? Now, remember, a question is a belief in disguise. So what you're actually believing is that I can't ever be good enough. That is the actual belief. Now, again, it's really important to see or figure out how else that you say the same thing, because though that might be the primary way that you say it, there might be other ways that you say it too, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, no one loves me, no one cares about me, right? Any and all are fair game. So it's important to make sure that you figure out all of the different ways that you say it. Now, a reframe for I can't ever be good enough is to try to think about times that you were good. A lot of times people, when they put the enough on the end of the word, it makes it like quantifiable. But here's the reality. Your worth isn't quantifiable, right? So let's take off that word enough. And so the new phrase is, I can't be good. And so I want you, if you have this belief, to start to question this. Is it possible I can be good? Right? So then what I want you to do is take it a little bit further and start to explore this and start to look at it from a different angle. When was a time that you were good? When was a time that you displayed behaviors of goodness? When was a time that you did something that other people would say, wow, that was really good, like, or you're a good person, or wow, that's admirable, or I really like that about you. And what you're doing here is you're actually showing your brain with the story, with the image, with the emotions, right? Have you ever done anything good? Is it possible you can be good? Did you ever take soup to your sick neighbor next door? Did you ever take someone's cart back from the grocery because they looked like they were struggling? Right? Like, that's good. And your brain only needs to see a few things to start making this shift. So we need to dissect these phrases first and foremost, because why can't I ever be good enough is a long, convoluted phrase. We're taking out the enough. We're taking out the why. I can't be good. That's a belief that you have. We're going to shift that. What else is possible? I can be good. Let your brain see the proof and evidence that it is possible that you can be good. Bring in emotion and bring in the details, and that's how you do a reframe. Okay, so I want to talk about how beliefs like this one, like, why can't I ever be enough? Now, just as a side, if you have not listened to this podcast a lot before, questions like why are beliefs in disguise. So why can't I ever be good enough? The actual belief here is that I can't ever be good enough. And beliefs like this form early in life. They form from your past experiences, especially if you've been emotionally abused in childhood or in narcissistic relationships. And these kinds of things will reinforce those beliefs about yourself. Now, over time, when you're trying to please others, when you're trying to avoid criticism, when you're trying to gain approval like I was, right, this becomes part of our identity, to believe that we are worthless, to believe that we are not good enough, that no matter what we do, it's not going to count. We're not going to get any credit for anything that we do, and we got to keep trying harder and keep, they're raising the bar, and we got to keep trying to climb higher and higher. And what happens is we get used to questioning our worth because we learn that no matter what we do and no matter how we try, we are never going to measure up. So, I think probably at some point I stopped trying. I was starting to check out near the end of my relationship before I, finally decided I was going to leave. I was starting to check out because it was like a waste of my time. Like, why would I keep trying? It doesn't matter. I've been doing all these things. I did these crazy things. I had my friends looking at me like, I can't believe that you would do that. I would never do that. And not like in a judgment way, but like just in a shocking kind of way, like, oh, you went hunting with your husband and got up at 4:00 in the morning. And like they would look at me like, what are you doing? But if you start to see that no matter what you do, it doesn't matter, you eventually start to check out. And I think that's what happened to me. And that's what basically led me to start being a little bit curious about my relationship and, why does he act this way? Why is he doing this? And if you read my book, When Tears Leave Scars, I still at this point didn't know I was being emotionally abused, but I was questioning my relationship, and I was talking about it to someone on the internet, and they said, well, that sounds like emotional abuse. That sounds like narcissistic abuse. And I was like, oh, never heard of that. So, but these kinds of beliefs, right, they are often invisible, right? They're not in our immediate awareness. They operate in the background. And that's why when I come on here on this podcast, I'm trying to help you to see these things, to be aware of it, because they're the real reason why we ruminate, why we feel the way that we do, why we hold feelings of regret, why we keep repeating conversations from the past or dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, right? Because of the beliefs. But the good news is you can change the beliefs. You don't have to carry them. You get to choose. You are not your thoughts, and you are not defined by the question, why can't I ever be good enough? Or the belief that I can't be. This is just a mental loop, and it's something that keeps you stuck in the past. Why can't I ever be good enough, right? I'm always messing up. No one cares about me. No one loves me, right? All these things are in that lower part of your subconscious mind that's running 95% of the show. So the first step to breaking free of this is realizing that these beliefs aren't the truth. They're just patterns, okay? It's not the truth. It's just a repeated cycle in your brain. And you can stop the cycle, and you can question it, and you can choose to think something differently. Now, when I finally saw that trying to be good enough or trying to be validated or try to be loved from my ex was a losing battle, I started to see, now this was later, I started to see that my worth had nothing to do with his opinion or approval. And this was when I was doing this work and trying to heal myself, I started to see that I was enough just as I was. I didn't need to do anything. I didn't need to do any of these things, right? And that realization was really the first step to breaking free from rumination. When I realized that I can just be me. I don't need to do anything to make someone else love me or affirm who I am. Now, I'd like to invite you to take a minute to reflect and think about your own thoughts of not being good enough. And what situations do you replay in your mind where you feel that you failed, or you feel that you weren't enough, or that you should have done something differently, or that if only XYZ, right? If only XYZ, if only I was prettier, I would be loved more. If only I was smarter, people would want to be around me. Those kinds of things are indicators of your subconscious beliefs, and write them down. If you are just letting these thoughts pass through your brain and you don't capture them and put them on paper, it's going to be pointless. You're not going to capture the essence of what it is that's driving you, because that's the stuff that's in your subconscious. Then ask yourself, what is the actual belief that's hiding behind this, right? Because if you say, if only blah, 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 well, what is the belief? So you need to put judgment on this, right? And is it, I believe that I need other people to like me in order to be happy, right? That's what I'm talking about. What is the actual belief? What are you believing? What's the judgment on it? And you might start to see that you have a need for approval from external sources, or that maybe it's that you believe you have to be perfect in order for people to love you. So identifying the belief can help you start to see why you're ruminating, and then give you the opportunity and the chance to question that. So if you want to share these with me, you are more than welcome to. Especially if you're like, I don't know what the belief is, you can email it to me or message me on social media and just say, hey, I did this exercise on this podcast and here's what I came up with, but I'm not seeing the belief, or I don't know what the belief is. And I'll tell you, because that's my job. That's what I'm really good at doing. I've been doing this for years for myself and for my clients. And I help people figure out what it is so that you can reflect on this and then you can start to change it. I want to say just thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing my story. I know it probably wasn't easy for you to listen to. It was definitely not easy for me to share, but I feel like it's important for these things to be said. Just like the opening part of my book is quite difficult to read, but a lot of you, after I released that book, had reached out to me and said, I've had these exact same thoughts. I've had these exact same emotions. I've thought the exact same thing. And so I wouldn't change it for the world. And I think it's important for us to show up as who we are. And that matters, because I love myself enough to know that even if you don't like my story, that I'm still going to be loved anyway. So if today's episode resonated with you, you're not going to want to miss the Break Free from Rumination training. Again, that's on December 11th at 7 p.m. And I'm going to be teaching you about the subconscious mind. I'm going to be helping you understand what's going on as far as rumination goes, and also in the discovery upgrade to uncover your beliefs specifically. Like if there's a lot of people on the call, we're just going to take as much time as we need to do that. If there's a few people, then great, you get that one-on-one work with me. Thanks again for being here. And I want you to remember that you are more than your thoughts. You are enough. You don't have to do anything to get people to love you. You can be you and know that you are loved and that you are good enough just as you are, right? This thought is just a belief, not a fact, not a truth. And the more you start to question your thinking, right? The thinking that is keeping you in pain, the belief that like, I can't ever be good enough. The more you start to question that, the closer you'll get to freeing yourself from rumination, and then actually start to feel what it feels like to love yourself. And if you personally have been struggling with these thoughts of not being good enough, then this training is going to be really, really helpful to you, and it's free. And I can't wait to help you start to break free from these patterns for good. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing my story and holding space for me to share something that was deeply painful for me, because, like I said before, I haven't shared this with many people. So I value you and your time, and I'll talk to you next week.